jumping around a little bit. Are we live, Lemoria?
Yeah.
Okay, we passed today the Senate version of the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act. We have the House version today. Can we conform it to the Senate version?
So moved.
So we don't add that. We don't add the little amendment about global campus.
Right.
Okay. Any objection? This is 156 Lutke bill. It was on 42. It's not on the list in front of you. Any objection to that? We are going to conform it. No, it's not. It's not on 51 or 52. It was on 42. I'm still in the 19th century here. So, no objection. Done. Okay, we're going to go to 991. Yes. Just start with the basic bill before we get to the amendments, because I got to tell them what's going on.
Okay. So House Bill 991 includes specified qualified conservation, the title is Natural Resources Forest Mitigation Banks Qualified Conservation. This is on list 51. House Bill 991 includes specified qualified conservation of forest within the definition of forest mitigation banking under the Forest Conservation Act. Bill allows for qualified conservation completed in a forest mitigation bank to be used as a method in establishing standards for meeting afforestation or reforestation requirements under state and local forest conservation programs, but limits the afforestation or reforestation credit that can be granted for qualified conservation. Bill also requires the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology to conduct a technical study to review changes in forest cover and tree canopy in the state and report its findings by December 1st, 2023.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, that's the bill as Ms. Morton explained it. I have some amendments, and I know Senator Hester has an amendment to try to improve this bill. Because I think it's going to have major problems in its current form. And then there's another surprise on top of it. As many people have followed, the House has decimated the Climate Solutions Now Act. They took out about 80% of the bill. And they also haven't moved it. ECM is the second, and they didn't vote on it today. So we don't know if it's coming back to us at all. Anyway, obviously, I'm disappointed. I think the whole Senate should be disappointed. One thing that they did adopt as an amendment or retained was the tree part of the bill. The 5 million trees, 10% in urban areas. And they also made a change on the funding, which some people should be happy about. They said the first year it would come from the Bay Restoration Fund, and subsequently it would come from the general fund.
Good idea.
Putting aside the merits, given that they were willing to keep that part of the bill, even though they got rid of schools and solar, they got rid of building codes, they got rid of funding. They got rid of funding to pay for the electrification of the vehicles. They kept it in there, but they took away the funding. And, of course. And they also lowered the goal from 60% to 50%. So what I'm proposing in the package of amendments is to put the tree section of the climate change bill into this tree bill. So we are retaining, and again, they still might reject it. They also put some other things in. You know that concrete bill we heard, that environmental concrete? They threw that in the climate bill. The chairman of ENT threw in a study on solar, which I had proposed 2 years ago and he killed. So it's a bit of a mess. And even if it were to come across, I'm not sure it has a future. So the amendments you're going to see, there are 2 or 3 small amendments to the bill as it came in, which we'll walk through. And all of the language on trees from the climate bill, including their funding approach. So I just wanted to give you a 30,000-foot view of what we're going to do. I still don't know if they're going to move the climate bill or they're going to say, let's talk about it. So far, they've done, all I've heard is crickets, nothing. And we don't have it in our possession. They have both bills in their possession, so it doesn't matter. So that's sort of where we are. I'm very disillusioned. I'm angry, to be honest. So we're going to try the best to make the best of a bad situation. So before I go back to Ms. Morton to walk through the amendments, any questions?
Quick question. Is the House aware of what we're doing? Have they indicated any openness to collaborating or conferencing on this?
They have been extremely unprincipled so far. I didn't talk to them or ask their permission. By now, they may know about it. Some of the advocates who've been working hard on this bill have been made aware. So that's where we are. Other questions? Okay, Ms. Morton, and she'll explain which amendments are specifically to the language of the bill. The bill deals with the Attorney General said that the 24 jurisdictions were misreading the Forest Conservation Act.
All 24.
Those that are using, many of them. It essentially says you retain trees, you plant trees. If you can't do that, you plant them in the watershed, or else you go beyond the watershed. Essentially, there's a progression to try to keep as many trees as possible to replace what you knock down. They have been saying, look, if we knock down 3 acres, if we go to a forest and we say we want to bank 3 acres and take them in perpetuity so they can never be developed or knocked down, some of them have chosen to do that in the past. The AG said, you can't do that. That's not in keeping with the Forest Conservation Act. Just so you understand, the opponents to the bill say, look, we're supposed to increase the number of trees. But if you knock down an acre and all you're doing is preserving another acre, you're not adding more trees. You're basically counting some trees twice. So they're not happy with the bill as it stands. The proponents of the bill say that that may be true, but if 5 acres are taken out of development in perpetuity, you're going to at least stop those trees from being knocked down. So if I'm trying to summarize, that's the debate that's been going on. I've tried to come to a Solomon-esque solution, which some will like or some won't like, who knows. And I know Senator Hester has an amendment also. So that being said, why don't you go through the ones specific to the bill first, and then just quickly do the climate amendments.
Right. So these amendments are in your packet. The amendments themselves begin on page 4. The first amendment is technical, and the second amendment is the amendment that really goes to the language. So this would be starting on page 8 of the bill, or of the amendment packet. This is the amendment to the existing language in the bill. So amendment number 2 alters the maximum afforestation or reforestation credit that may be granted for the use of qualified conservation completed in a forest mitigation bank to 15% of the forest area encumbered in perpetuity, and require. So the bill came in and allowed for what has been going on, which is sort of a 1-to-1. The House amended it to say that you only get a 50% credit. So essentially, for every square foot of forest that you are losing, you'd have to have 2 square feet of preserved forest to offset that from the mitigation bank. This would say take it closer to a 1-to-6, 1-to-7 ratio. So that's the language there on the top of page 8. And then the next part of amendment number 2 requires the technical study conducted by the Hughes Center to include specified information related to the use of land under qualified conservation for forest mitigation purposes. So it would add to what their mission that they must study the extent to which existing forest mitigation banks are composed of forests that have been created or restored, which is what the Attorney General said was the original intent of the bill, versus forests that are under qualified conservation. Those are this forest land that's being put under perpetual easement. And the effect of using qualified conservation completed in a forest mitigation bank to meet afforestation or reforestation requirements under state and local programs on the state's policy of achieving no net loss of forest. So that's amendment number 2, and again, that's the language that goes to the language of the current bill.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute. Questions? So these are amendments basically specifically addressed to the bill. I want to keep this somewhat separate. I've talked, right now, for any 2 square foot, I'm going to use an acre instead. For every acre, they would have to preserve 2 acres to get credit for it. I originally put in, this is reverse numbers, 1 to 6. I think we should move it to 1 to 5, so I would like a friendly amendment to make that 15%, 20%, if there's no objection. Okay, any objection to that amendment? So essentially it's saying if you're going to do this, you got to do more than a 1-to-1, 1-to-2 savings of trees in existing tree stands. And there's another amendment to the amendment. Senator Hester has an amendment to grandfather. Senator Hester, do we have it anywhere?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still trying to figure out where we are in the bill. Numbers of the bill and the page numbers of the packet messed up. Where's the amendment that says 1 to 6?
The confusing part here is the way it's done. It doesn't say 1 to 6. It says the original bill is 1 to 2, but it said 50%.
Got it.
This would take it, and he's offered the change to make it 20%, which is a 1 to 5 sort of ratio. The way it's drafted, which it just has to do with how these, because you're dealing with credits, not actual kind of acres, is basically saying that the credit that you're getting is sort of that's the percentage kind of relationship there.
People do not have to pursue this approach. This is fairly far down the line in terms of a builder or developer. They can retain the trees, plant more trees on site, plant them in the watershed, or this is another option they could pursue if they choose to.
Of my amendment, because I don't think folks have it yet. There's 2 parts to it. The first was to make sure that whatever happens, that folks who had already made an agreement to this extent, that they were grandfathered in. And we had chosen January 1st as the timeline by which we would honor kind of those contracts. So that would keep, especially a lot of farmers, it would keep them whole. That was the amendment that was offered by the Maryland Farm Bureau. The second part of the amendment, I was really trying, I keep going back and forth because we have this study that's coming out from the Harry Hughes Foundation, and I kind of hate to make a big decision about forest conservation when we've got this report forthcoming. So the second part of the amendment was to say that we would pause pause forest banking in its current form or whatever until we had that report, and then we'd come back next year in the General Assembly to basically take the recommendations from that report and put it into the statute. So that was the intent of both pieces of the amendment. I don't believe the second part was drafted the way I wanted it to be, but that was my intention.
Can we split that into two amendments?
I would like to move the first part, the grandfather, because I'm not sure it was clear, this portion of the bill would be sunset in 3 years. The mitigation, and it would also call for the completion of the study. So rather than reopening it, I think we should close the door unless they come back with enough information to say this is a good practice. So I would either move or see as friendly the first part of grandfathering that Senator Hester has proposed.
And to be clear, so the idea behind the grandfathering would have to do with the creation of these banks. So right, the thing with these forest mitigation banks is often before you even get to the point of selling credits, you get the county to sort of sign off on saying, all right, like, we approve your forested land as a forest mitigation bank, and we're going to put it under an easement and allow you to sell these credits. So the way Senator Hester's amendment would work, and the reason we don't have an amendment in front of you is I think your aide at 5:45 told me something different from what we had been discussing. So I have the original language, but I think we changed. It sounds like there was a change in how the approach would be. But the idea would be, if you look at the bill, so page 3 of the bill, it would be a change to the definition of qualified conservation. It would say that qualified conservation means that the conservation of all or part of an existing forest that was approved on or before December 31st, 2020 by the appropriate state or local forest conservation program for the purpose of establishing a forest mitigation bank, and is encumbered in perpetuity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea being that nobody going forward can set up a forest mitigation bank based off of this qualified conservation concept unless and until the General Assembly comes back and changes that.
Senator?
No, that sounds good, the first part.
So if there's no objection, I'd like to adopt that amendment to the package amendment.
First of all, before we make changes to the existing forest mitigation bank program, I just want to understand who we're grandfathering, and I'm just also trying to understand is and April, maybe you can clarify this. Do retention forest banks, they're required to be 2 acres preserved for each 1 acre of required mitigation?
Of different questions there. So the grandfathering essentially protects those landowners who, in good faith, had the county, said, I've already got forested land on my property. I'm happy for you to put an easement on it. We'll turn it into a mitigation bank, and then I can make money off of selling these credits.
So they're the ones who, in good faith, are already in the program, and
They've already created their mitigation bank. The issue is
Okay.
the Attorney General's opinion is essentially said counties had been interpreting this law incorrectly. So it throws in jeopardy all those people who previously had the counties sign off on their land as a forest mitigation bank purposes, and they've already put their land under easement and have gone through all these, gone through the process to get their land in this program.
do we know approximately what those numbers look like?
No, and that's one of the things that is in Senator Pinsky's amendment, is to have the Hughes Center, because it's not clear right now how many of, because there are forest mitigation banks, all over the state, but the language of the law says that you're only supposed to have a forest mitigation bank made up of land that has been, actively restored or planted. And the counties were allowing land that they were conserving trees, and it's not clear of the existing forest mitigation banks what the composition is. How much of it is this qualified conservation versus how much is land that was, appropriately restored or planted with trees.
Okay, so then Senator Hester's amendment simply grandfathers anyone statewide who's currently in the program.
Who currently has had their land signed off on as a mitigation bank.
Okay.
But it would not, it would prevent counties and the state from,
Okay,
going
that
forward
was
from
helpful before we get
continuing
into, I know there's other numbers we're coming to, but that was helpful to have that background.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then the 2-to-1, because you also asked about that, that's not the current law, that's the bill. So, there's kind of two separate issues of what do we do with these mitigation banks that we have already created with this qualified conservation land, and then how do we allow those banks to be used going forward? So the bill, as it came out of the House, said, okay, you can still purchase credits from those to get credit for, an acre of trees that you're taking down for development purposes, but at a 2-to-1 ratio. The chair would be changing that to say like a 5-to-1 ratio. That's the 20% that's in there.
Okay, so on the Hester amendment on the grandfathering, I saw no objection. That's adopted to the amendments. The other part of the amendments sunsets a bill in what year and where is that amendment?
So this is actually, and it's just because of the way this bill is laid out, it ends up having to be in amendment number 3. But if you look on page 26 of your voting packet, sections 1, 2, and 7 of the bill, so that's basically all of the current provisions that are in the bill, would remain effective for a period of, and I apologize, I should have done a reprint here so it was a little easier to follow, but it was just very lengthy. Shall remain effective for a period of 3 years and 1 month, and at the end of June 30th, 2024, those sections would be abrogated and of no further force and effect. 2024. No, so those other provisions have to do with the part we haven't gotten to yet, which is the climate part.
And the other part is they must complete this study, which the Harry Hughes Center is planning to do, but hasn't been funded yet, and we are extremely optimistic it will be funded. So the idea is they come and report what the tree cover is across the state, how much we've lost, how much we've gained, and we've added 1 or 2 charges to understand what role this mitigation will play in it. And they'll come back with a complete, hopefully objective study. Senator.
So I'm just trying to understand the 50% and the sunset. Where did we come up with the 1 to 5? I mean, I don't know where they came up with the 1 to 2 either, but where did we come up with the 1 to 5 ratio?
No, thank you. Right now it's 1 to 1, but the Attorney General said they've been implementing. They shouldn't have allowed that.
Right.
The House said, we'll let it go, but for every, and I'm going to use an acre, 1 acre you clear, you've got to preserve in the bank 2 acres. I don't think it goes far enough, and I'm proposing 5 acres, or a 5-to-1 ratio. And again, to explain, if I knock down, the idea in this state.
I understand the policy.
I'm sorry?
I said, I understand that, if we knock down, a big tree, we can't plant it with just one small tree. I guess.
Correct. But not only that, if you knock down an acre and preserve an acre,
It's net zero.
no, you actually lose an acre.
Right, okay.
So I don't want people to pursue the cheap. We have a policy in law that says there should be no net loss of forest. By knocking down an acre and just holding on to another acre means we're losing an acre. So I want there to be an incentive or a disincentive to pursue this. So the more acreage we can take out of future development, the more likely we'll get to no net loss of forest.
Right, and I like the 5 better than the 2. But is it really going to take 3 years for the Harry Hughes Center to finish this? Like, couldn't we, I'd just like to, I don't know, we've got a study coming. I'd really like to figure out what the study says and put the policy in to back up the study. So, we've got a 3-year sunset on this. Like, what if it needs to be like 8 or something, or?
If you want to do a 2-year, that's fine, Senator. But it's going to take them a year and a half to get it to us. Then we're going to. So the question is, do we take this up next legislative session or the session afterwards?
I see, okay.
So in other words, we get the report. We don't want this to sunset. We haven't gotten the report yet. We're going to need time after the report to review it and then come with supplemental legislation.
Okay, I don't have a strong feeling as long as we grandfather the folks in.
Okay. So before, any objection to the amendments to the mitigation bill before we get to hooking on the climate change tree part of it? Senator.
So that would be taking it from the 2-to-1 to the 6-to-1, 5-to-1? Is that what the amendment is?
10 to 20%.
But right now,
No, it's a 5-to-1, and I think they actually do it in 2 square foot.
Whatever area you have. So if it's, the ratio doesn't change, right? So if it's 10 square feet or 10 acres, it's still the same ratio of trees or forest cover being lost versus forest cover being preserved.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I'm listening to the testimony, I'm reading the testimony and the system here, and a lot of folks have sent me emails. And a couple emails stood out. One from the Mattawoman Watershed Society in Charles County, which is the most productive tributary to the Chesapeake Bay in the region. And they're saying this bill is just kind of bad news for that watershed. And really interested, I'm looking at another testimony from Central Maryland Beekeepers Association saying how this bill would be bad news for our honeybees in Maryland because you replace these old growth that a lot of folks consider junk trees like black locust, but they're the most prolific source for honey and honeybees. And honeybees is not just good for giving us sweet honey, but they pollinate a lot of our crops. And without them, we won't get a lot of fruits and even vegetables, right? And so, I'm a beekeeper, and this kind of touched to my heart. My bees are doing well. Went home a couple of days ago. It's warm. They're all over the place, and they're doing really well. But I kind of wondering, with looking at all these different environmental groups that care about the forest and natural environment being opposed to this, I would love to be a yes man at this stage in the General Assembly session. But, I mean, I just have to kind of look at that and say, why are we even going to push through this bill now when so many folks who are protectors of our environment are saying, this is a bad idea at this time? I'm just curious, and sorry to bring that up, but that's kind of on my brain.
Look, Senator, as the bill came in, I would have voted against it. I didn't like it. I mean, I heard from CBF, I heard from all the groups, the very same people you spoke to. I'm on their side, essentially. I think with these amendments, I know at least CBF has said they're fine with it. I think LCV is also fine with it. I haven't checked back with every group because this has been over the last 12, 20 hours. So
you're saying with these amendments, a lot of these groups will be fine with.
I can only speak to two large ones that care about trees, and with these amendments, they're fine. I talked to Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I think Senator Hester's talked with LCV. I have not talked with them, but I'm pretty sure they're also on board.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going from, testimony and emails that are
I thought it was a terrible
stack
bill.
right here, right?
I thought it was a terrible bill. I'm with you, but this disincentivizes it, and it takes more trees out of potential building and construction.
Okay.
And in other words, they can knock down 3 acres or 5 acres and put up 20 townhomes, and they can start a couple seedlings in that field over there. This allows them to bank 2 acres or 3 acres of existing trees that are at least 4.5 foot tall, hopefully 50 feet tall. And once they're in the bank, they can't be knocked down. And if we do a 5-to-1, it's a steep price to pay. And they may or may not pay it, and they might just do other things. So I don't want to speak for all of them, Senator.
Yeah, okay.
I talked to them and tried to make it. And plus, the second half of the bill now also calls for planting 5 million trees.
Okay, yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, so the trees that they will bank, is that new plantings or that's old growth that they will keep, they will not cut down?
My understanding, it has to be at least a certain size, which I can't remember. All the trees have to be at least 4.5 foot high and at a minimum of 2 inches in diameter. So it's not seedlings.
So let me see, 4.5, like this tall, those are kind of young trees.
At a minimum.
Okay.
So it can't be seedlings that half of them are going to die. Is that?
Well, and also, so this bill is dealing specifically also with qualified conservation. So actually, this bill is dealing with the mature trees. The way the Forest Conservation Act more generally works is for every square foot of trees that you're taking down, the first, there's like a hierarchy of what you have to do. The first priority is to replant those trees, the same number of trees somewhere else on the same property. The next is to plant some off the property, and then as you go down the list, you get to forest mitigation banking. The idea with forest mitigation banking was to sort of, let some, private equity kind of into this group with this idea that, me as a private landowner, I could take an unused plot of my land and plant, a couple acres of trees and then sell those credits to developers. The issue is that counties were also allowing people who already had a nice mature forest on their property instead of planting new trees, they were just allowing them to put those existing forests under easement and then use those, allow them to sell credits. So the issue there is the whole purpose of the Forest Conservation Act is to, get us towards this no net loss policy. For every tree we take down, we put another one up. Well, if you're letting people take down a tree and then buy a credit from a bank of existing trees, that doesn't necessarily get you there. The counter argument, though, is that if we are preserving in perpetuity large swaths of existing forest, that might actually be more valuable than planting, as you said, a couple of sad saplings like off in the corner that are just going to die. So that has been the argument in favor of allowing these qualified conservation banks to exist.
Okay. So thank you for that information. So you're saying that mature forests would be part of that banking?
Actually, the qualified conservation stuff does tend to be mature forests because it's existing trees, it's not recently planted ones.
Great, thank you.
Senator Gallion.
Yeah, I was just kind of re-looking over some of the things in the bill folder and all, and I'm not as familiar with the forest banking stuff as you all are, but my understanding is that the intent from the bill, and I think it stayed that way as it came over from the House, was to ensure that the forest mitigation banking practices can continue in direct relation to that AG opinion. So I guess my question is, if we add on these amendments, the way things are going between the House and the Senate, that would put that all at risk, wouldn't it? I mean, probably the whole bill will go down if these amendments go on.
Well, without any amendments, this bill was going down anyway. I would have moved that we make it unfavorable, or it would have been deep in the drawer, to be honest with you. And again, I think farmers are going to benefit from this. And actually, the 5-to-1 means more stands of trees they have on their farm become more valuable.
So even with the amendments, could you still say that this will be addressing that as far as it's concerned, the AG opinion, the longstanding practices related to it?
I will let the attorney answer that. I think if we change, he made an opinion on what the Forest Conservation Act said, and they thought people exceeded what it said. If we change what it says, I think it will comply, but Ms. Morton's the attorney, not me.
The short answer is yes. So the whole idea is that the AG is interpreting the existing law to say you can't have qualified conservation banking at all. This says you can have it, but we're going to put some guardrails on it, which means that some counties that are using it might have to change their practices. Now, to be clear, some counties already, at least in the case of qualified mitigation, it's my understanding, are already requiring like a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio. So it's just, this would move that cap a little higher to say, you can't do more than, you can't, 5-to-1 at a minimum, and if the locals want to require more than that, they can.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick clarifying question. I guess maybe this is for Ms. Morton. The sunset then will allow for the full period of the study to be completed, and then we will have time to come back into session to address any of the findings and recommendations from that study. We'll have 1 year, I guess, to do that, right? Just 1 year? Okay. Okay. Just wanted to make that clear.
That's the purpose. If they say this is a disaster, it's over. And we're back to the case where it's not legal. But in the short term, if they're going to do it, they've got to do this 5-to-1 match. Okay, the second part is the pure adoption of the exact same language that we voted on in the Climate Solutions Now Act, other than the change in the funding. So year one is the Bay Restoration Fund. In subsequent years, the subsequent 8 or 9 years, it comes from the general fund. So that's the rest of the amendment. So, on the Pinsky amendment, that's also been amended with the Hester amendment. Discussion. Anybody object to the amendments? Seeing none, it is 10-0-1, and Senator Hester can come back on that. The bill as amended. Roll call.
What, and then did you also add something else to that? I'm just a little lost.
Okay. I first asked if the amendment, the full Pinsky amendment that's been amended with the Hester amendment with the grandfather, if there are any objections. I saw no red lights or no hands.
The grandfather,
That-
right.
No. I said the amendment, including the friendly amendment from Senator Hester. So we were voting on the amended set of amendments. I saw no red lights or no hands. So we adopted the amendments. Now we're going to the bill as amended. And we're about to start a roll call.
So that includes Amendment 2 and what else?
Everything.
And again, this starts at middle of the page 8 and goes through the, page 26 of your voting packet. All of that is just language from the Climate Solutions Now Act regarding trees, with the change to make the funding after the first year just come out of the general fund. So BRF for 1 year, Bay Restoration Fund for 1 year, and then everything is generally funded.
So if we is one of our options to do the grandfather and the tree section of the climate bill, but then have the status quo from the House bill? If you want to support the tree section being added, but the status quo of the remitigation from the House bill, is that an option that we have?
Well, if you want to amend it, you can do that. I think that's going to go down, but you're free to amend anything you want.
So right now, we're voting on the whole thing.
Correct.
The grandfather, the 5-to-1, and then the climate change.
And the sunset on the tree mitigation part and the study. Or you can abstain, Senator. Okay. Roll call.
My vote. During this discussion, I received several text messages from some of the advocates. Not that I didn't trust your word, Mr. Chairman, but they said yes. So I vote yes.
And Senator, I did get one. Sierra Club supports it with a sunset. We forgot one small thing, and if you want, we can redo the vote. The title to the bill changes. It becomes the Tree Solutions Now Act.
That helps working families.
No, we wanted to make a point to the House that since they don't want to address climate, we at least can deal with trees now. So if no objection, that same vote will stand 10-0-1. Thank you all. There are probably more chapters to this to be written over the next 4 days. Who knows where the House is, as we've seen on police accountability and a lot of other bills. I had Senator Riley, then I had the Vice Chair.
Hester's not here, so it's 9-0-2. She abstained.
9 in favor, 0 against, 1 abstention, and 1 absent. And
Very
she,
good.
because it won't affect the
Right.
outcome.
Right.
Thank you, Senator.
That's right.
Vice Chair.
Mentioned that sometimes we can't see the forest conservation for the trees.
Oh. Boo.
If you're watching on YouTube, the committee takes no responsibility for that.
I think you should just leave me alone sometimes.
Okay. The more that happens, the more I don't call on you with a red light. Let's go, let's try to knock out number 52 very, very quickly. List 52, I think, plus they have to get up to B&T.
All right, so House Bill 15, Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. This bill establishes the Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, obviously. So the difference between House Bill 15 and Senate Bill 85 that we passed specifically includes, or the House bill fails to include the clarifying language in terms of funding. So if we want the two to be identical, we would have to add an amendment to conform them, which would place language stating, subject to the availability of funds, the office will carry out their list of responsibilities. So it would be a clarifying, conforming amendment to make those two.
Yeah. Okay, the motion is to add the amendment, which we added to the Senate version, conforming it. It still goes to B&T. Any objection? Would anybody like to be recorded in the negative? So, right, no, so we have to first vote the amendment. We're adding the amendment to the House bill. Okay, thank you. Any objection to the amendment? No objection to the amendment. On the bill, who'd like to be voted in the negative, who didn't like it the first time? Okay, 7-4. Usual cast of characters. Gallion, Carozza, Riley, and Simon Eyre. Next bill.
House Bill 867, Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative Program Fund. So this bill establishes a mandatory appropriation for the Bernie Fund. The differences between this House bill and the Senate bill that we passed, essentially the House bill removes a sunset on the mandatory appropriation. So in the Senate bill language, the mandatory appropriation to the Bernie Fund would have ceased in 2026. Now the House bill removes any definite time periods on the mandatory appropriation. And so the mandate will go from 2020 onward and indefinitely.
The Senate version had a sunset.
Senate version sunsetted for 2026.
This is important. I don't. So, would we assume that the B&T approved the Senate version with the sunset? Is that correct? Would that be correct? So that would be my own.
I believe we passed it.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying B&T. So the only reason, colleagues, I would just say would be to accept, to conform it to the Senate, is that we know B&T will approve that, and that way this. So to not, yeah. So that's why I would encourage us to conform it.
Motion is to conform it to the
Question.
Senator.
So B&T, though, they voted in following us for the version with the sunset, though, correct? So we don't know for sure that they're going to go for the House version that removes the sunset.
No, the senator is saying just the opposite. She's saying that we know, conform it to what we did with the Senate because we know they'll support that.
Leaving it in the Senate form, you mean?
That's
Oh,
what
okay.
she said.
Sorry, I was mixed up. I agree with you.
Okay. Any objection to removing the amendment and putting it with the sunset? Seeing none. Anybody object to the bill? Okay, it goes up to budget and tax. 1230.
So Senate Bill 1239, Department of Housing and Community Development, appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance program establishment. This bill is a cross-file of House Bill 859, also on this list. So this bill establishes the appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance program within the Department of Housing and Community Development. The program will be for the purpose of providing financial assistance to affordable housing developers that work in low-income census tracts in order to close appraisal gaps in historically redlined communities. The bill requires the department to approve qualifying applications within a timely manner. The bill defines terms like affordable housing and appraisal gap, establishes an appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance fund, which will be used to provide assistance for the program, requires each county within the state to submit a yearly report to DHCD, indicating areas within their jurisdiction that will qualify for financial assistance, requires DHCD itself to submit a report each year to the Senate Budget and Tax Committee, House Ways and Means, and House Appropriations on the number of funds given to majority-minority populations, requires a study for the purpose of determining whether racial discrimination has existed. And DHCD must conduct this study and report to the General Assembly by June 30th, 2022 on housing values, appraisals, refinancing rates over the past 30 years. And that concludes the summation of that one.
And there's a Senate version as well. What's the pleasure of, it's been moved favorable. Is there a second? Let's put it on the floor. Senator Patterson seconds. Discussion.
Senator, can I make one point?
Please.
So on the House bill, I should point out the distinctions because we never got to this one. So the Senate bill amendments are before you, and all of the amendments are to conform. So in the Senate version, as originally proposed, there was a mandatory appropriation, which has been taken out. Value thresholds have also been removed, so just preemptively addressing those issues. Senate will conform to the House that sponsors intent.
So we're going to take the House version first, which removes the mandatory appropriation, plus it still needs to go to budget and tax. Well, I think, well, no, please.
Originally, the fiscal implications were significant enough that it's understandable that it would have gone to budget and tax also. But now that that's been clarified, revised, and removed, I'm just wondering whether the committee still needs to take the time to send it to budget and tax, or whether we could send it directly to the floor if that were the will of the body.
No, I don't think it's up to us. We would have to get it a formal change
reassigned.
from the Senate President's office.
Okay.
I mean, look, they may be putting this money in, so for them to take a look at this, my guess is they'll approve it like they did the, well, they haven't looked at the other. So,
Yeah.
okay, I think we've heard tentatively that they're going to move it. So, on the House bill, as it is, anybody like to be recorded in the negative on the this redlining appraisal gap legislation? Saying none, we will record it as 10-0-1 absent. And we will amend Senate Bill 859 to look like the House bill, removing the mandatory appropriation. And I assume we'll use the same vote, which was 10-0 and 1 absent on that bill as well. They will both go up to budget and tax. Okay, let's go to 1253.
House Bill 1253, National Capital Strategic Economic Development Program Eligibility and Funding. So this bill is a cross-file of Senate Bill 509, and essentially the bill defines a national capital region for purposes of Department of Housing and Community Development funding. So quite a few differences in this House bill that is currently before us in the Senate version. So the House bill removes a sunset on the mandatory appropriations to the operating and capital budget for the fund which governs and oversees the National Capital Regions Fund. So initially, the funding mandate would have ceased in 2025. Now the mandatory appropriations will continue indefinitely. So the House bill requires 100% of the fund to be used for projects in sustainable communities in designated portions of Prince George's County and Montgomery County from 2022 onward, and also makes that the focus of that funding indefinite. So under the Senate bill, 75% was to be placed within those periods, and that in the time period was to be 2022 to 2023. And no funding designations were made after 2024. The focus of the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund is also changed. In the Senate version, the focus of the areas were defined as areas within the Beltway, and now it's extended to areas in Prince George's County and Montgomery County. So this extends the funding priorities, extends the scope of those areas that would receive funding within this region. And there are also several technical changes that are made that are pretty inconsequential.
This changes the definition.
So the Senate bill changed the definition, and the House bill that we're looking at changes the definition as well. So no difference in the definition. However, the House bill changed the focus of the funding areas without changing the definition. It's not inconsistent, but kind of an argument could have been made that additional amendments should have been looked into. But the definition remains the same as the Senate version, but in terms of scope of funding within the Capital Development Fund, the scope of it is increased beyond the Senate version that we passed.
Yeah, it adds new areas which might take money away from some of the original areas that were intended, basically.
So the areas that were originally intended should still be covered. It'll still be Prince George's.
But it's not unlimited money.
That's correct too.
So in other words, if a lot of it was intended for, hypothetically, inside the Beltway in the poor communities in Prince George, like Seat Pleasant, for example, or Capitol Heights, by adding an area, say, hypothetically like Olney, the money could potentially go to a lot of other areas away from the areas that it was originally intended. Right. Senator Patterson.
In part, my concern, Mr. Chair, is just a continuation of a program that Senator Peters had a couple years ago.
It is, but the House sent over something with a new amendment that was never in the bill before. So we could amend this to look like the Senate version, and it would remain as it was. Yeah. So I will entertain that motion from you if you so move.
I'm going to move it, so I'm going to get in trouble.
Okay, so Senator Patterson's motion is to conform this to the Senate version, which takes care of the definition and doesn't add these new territories in. It's been seconded by Senator Riley. Discussion on the amendment. I had Senator Carozza first, and then I had Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. It was the House bill that took off the 2025 and was it that a sunset on the mandatory? So that was on the House bill, so then we would be conforming it back to the Senate bill, which had the sunset?
We've decided on that portion yet. It's kind of three major changes. Where we are now is just on the scope of the funding. I was actually going to inquire about.
Okay. Oh, okay. I guess I was looking at the three amendments they added.
Right. And so I'm saying I think for this portion, we're just talking about of taking the scope of the fund back to the way it was in the original Senate posture. Now, the mandate, as it stands now, because we haven't come to a decision, is still without a sunset. So it'll still be for an indefinite period of time.
But this amendment says it strikes through 2025 and replaces it with each fiscal year thereafter.
Right. So essentially, under the Senate version, it stopped the mandates to the fund, the mandatory appropriation, and the just amount of funding that the area was getting stopped in 2025. And
In
now
the Senate version.
In the Senate version,
And
correct.
the chair just proposed taking, I thought, all of it to conform back to this. Is that your amendment, sir?
I hadn't paid attention to that aspect, but I'm fine with that.
It would take everything back to the original Senate bill.
Yeah, we can deal with the sunset another year. I mean, this could go to conference, so who knows? But it was, Senator Patterson said, take it back to the Senate language.
Which included that 2025.
That is my understanding, and that's what committee counsel said.
Okay, that's just a thank you.
Okay, Senator Gallion?
That's why I
Okay,
had my-
discussion on Patterson, which would amend the House bill to conform it to the Senate.
My frat brother, too.
Would anybody like to be voted in the negative on that motion? So it's favorable with amendments. Thank you. Okay, we're done with 52. Let's go back to 51. Senator Simon, there's a 185. Let's go to 185.
Give me a second to catch up.
HB 185 on 51.
Okay. House Bill 185, alcoholic beverages on sale, required multiple purchases. This bill prohibits an alcoholic beverage license holder in the state or an employee of a license holder from conditioning the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption on the purchase of more than one alcoholic beverage. The issuer of an alcoholic beverages license may revoke or suspend the license for violating this requirement. Additionally, the bill establishes criminal penalties for such a violation.
Oh, thanks, sir.
Yeah, I talked with the delegate, so I would just move favorable on this.
Discussion on 185. Seeing none, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative? Seeing none, bill passes to the floor. Hold 1 second. Okay. Let's go to 854.
House Bill 854, Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, inclusion of child welfare data in governing board. This bill adds child welfare data consisting of out-of-home placement data, family preservation services data, and child protective services data to the data collected, analyzed, and reported by the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. To that end, the bill adds the Social Services Administration within the Department of Human Services to the entities required to provide data to the center, and add the Secretary of Human Services or the Secretary's designee to the membership of the governing board of the center. The center must develop a clear and easy-to-understand graphic data dashboard that is published annually on its website with information, disaggregated by county, on the experience of children who were provided with out-of-home placement and how out-of-home placement affected their participation in higher education. The bill also changes the method by which the center must annually provide dual enrollment information from a report to a graphic data dashboard by December 15th, 2021, and each December 15th thereafter. The center must send a copy of both the data dashboards as the dashboards appeared on the date they are sent. No amendments and no opposition.
I'll entertain a motion if someone, it's been moved by the chair, vice chair, favorable. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Senator Patterson. Any discussion? Seeing none, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on 854? Seeing no hands, it will be recorded as 9-0 to absent. Okay, let's go to the back page of 51. We have a Senate bill, and we also have a matching House bill, but I don't know if it ever gets out of rules, but let's do both. 711 Senate bill. King.
Senate Bill 711, Growing Family Child Care Opportunities Pilot Program. The bill establishes the Growing Family Child Care Opportunities Pilot Program in the Maryland State Department of Education to provide grants to establish and support local pilot programs in the state. Among other specified requirements, grant recipients must provide technical assistance and financial incentives for recruited individuals as they navigate the department's process to become a registered family child care provider in underserved communities throughout the state. In fiscal years 23 and 24, the governor must include $450,000 in the state budget for the program, and the bill takes effect July 1, 2021, and terminates June 30th, 2025. There is one amendment in the packet, and this would be for both the House bill, which is House Bill 944, and the Senate Bill 711, and that's on page 3. And this amendment would authorize authorizes the governor to use federal funds to the extent authorized by federal law to fund this program.
Any objection to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment's adopted. Would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on SB 711? And we'll take the same vote on 944 and adopt the same amendment unless it's already on there. Is it?
It is not. No.
So we will take the same action on the Senate bill and the House bill 944. Would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on the two bills? Okay. They're passed 9-0 to absent. Okay, sandwiches are in the fridge. And I think most people, if not all, have been vaccinated. And I want to keep rolling. So if you did order a sandwich, let's take a 5-minute break. You don't have to eat now. I mean, you know, it's your stomach. But if you'd like to get food, the sandwiches are in the fridge, so we can take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back and try to knock through some more of these. You can bring it back in just when you're done. Put your mask back on, and also we want to stay clean so we don't have any little critters. Okay, we're going to go to HB 1058. We have two guests. We don't want to keep them all night. Stacey, I hate to interrupt your
No,
eating your sandwich, but
I hope I don't chew while I'm talking here. House Bill 1058, Public Ethics, Disclosures, Training, and Use of Confidential Information, Integrity and High Office Act. This bill makes several modifications to the Maryland Public Ethics Law as it applies to the state and public officials and employees. Among other things, the bill requires the State Ethics Commission to provide a training course on the requirements of the ethics law to state officials subject to the jurisdiction of the commission. This would substantially expand the people who have to take this training course. It establishes various additional disclosure and reporting requirements for specified state officials, expands the type of interest attributable to an individual for purposes of financial disclosure, and prohibits former officials and employees from disclosing or using specified confidential information for personal economic benefit or the economic benefit of another.
it's been moved and seconded. Discussion or questions of Ms. Goodman, or if Ms. Diadaly is with us. Dia, are you in the sound of?
I'm here.
Okay. Anything you want to add to Stacy?
Nope, Stacy did a great job. She always does.
Thank you.
Part of the fan club, huh? Okay. She'll buy you dinner later. Any discussion? Seeing none, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative? That was easy. Go have dinner if you haven't had it. That's it. So the vote is 10-0, 1 absent. Thank you, Ms. Daly. Have a good rest of the evening. Okay, let's go to Jared. That bill is 1350.
Okay. House Bill 1350. Where did he go? He was there. This bill allows for disbursements by a campaign finance entity to be approved rather than made by the treasurer or in certain instances the chairman of the campaign finance entity. The bill also requires campaign finance entities that become liable for specified civil penalties related to an entity's finances to subsequently submit bank statements with the entity's campaign finance reports for a certain period of time, unless waived by the State Board of Elections after at least one submission. There are no amendments, and there was no opposition at the hearing.
Stacy, could you do it in layperson's language one more time?
Sure.
1350.
Essentially, this bill does like two things. First, it just codifies some existing practice, and that's the part where it talks about the disbursements. Essentially, this person never made the disbursements. They kind of approved someone going in and making disbursements on behalf of the entity. The second half of the bill, what it does is if a bad actor violates certain provisions of the campaign finance law, then they'd have to hand over their bank statements, minus the identifying information so that they can track the money. And then they have to do this for about, 2 years, Jared? And then less than that if the state board waives.
Correct, yes. And these bad actors, if you look at the enumerated offenses, they were all because there was, failing to disperse, failing to report all contributions or expenditures made, failure to maintain a bank account. So this is something that they've already been, there was a violation of, that they didn't, comply with disclosure requirements. And so this is to help them get back on track for compliance purposes.
What's the pleasure? Do you have a question, Senator Carozza?
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand what the treasurer, or other campaign officials can and cannot do under this. Where it says the treasurer has to, I guess, requires the treasurer to approve rather than make all disbursements. So is that in essence, if there are others involved in a campaign, they no longer have those authorities? I'm trying to understand this in practicality, how this works.
So the first part, Senator, in practicality is just nothing is going to change. Treasurers right now do not make all the expenditures for a political committee. They basically approve them. Other people go out and do it on their behalf, and then they bring out the receipt, and then either it's been reimbursed or the treasurer gives the debit card over there or the check or anything like that to another individual to make that expenditure. So this is just basically more or less changing a verb to more reflect the reality on the ground and in the field.
But it says a treasurer approves all disbursements.
Right. They still have to approve the disbursement. It's all all contributions and expenditures must pass through the hands of the treasurer. The treasurer's still got the final say because they control the checkbook in these situations there. They still approve it, but they don't have to go out and physically go to Home Depot to buy the sign or to buy the steak. They don't have to make that expenditure. They can just approve it and have a campaign staffer go out and purchase it on their behalf.
Vice Chair?
I think Senator Carozza kind of either confused me or flagged something. To be clear, Ms. Goodman, this is only for party central committees, correct? This is not individual candidate campaigns that we're talking about, or is it both? Jared, maybe you can help with that first question, but then I've got follow-up questions.
So the first part is on the word approve. This is for all political committees, right? So
Chewy. Okay, he wants some of our dinner. Okay, so I don't know that I have a problem with it, but I do want to flag that the way I read this, this is changing the job description of our campaign chairs. Because right now they are mostly honorary, and they just kind of sign the report, and they're vulnerable to going to jail or overseeing paying late fines or something, but they are really not doing anything. This sounds like they need to be consulted on whether you go with this vendor or that vendor, and they have to sign off on it before you spend money, and they have to approve things, and I don't even know what that means. Is that you're calling or email, we have to have a paper trail that says, yes, that's okay by me? I'm a little perplexed.
So, Vice Chair, I think, one, the treasurer part about approval, that's for all. The chair part is basically the same sort of, it's current law, which is the chair only approves or makes disbursements if the treasurer is unable to do that or unable to perform their duties. So that's where, so the treasurer is still the key cog in the campaign finance entity, only if the treasurer is unable to it because that person is overseas, and we have regulations about the what constitutes temporarily being unable to perform duties of the office. And then the chair then can approve those disbursements for the campaign while the treasurer is unable to perform those duties. And then they have to file the report and everything else back to the treasurer. That's not changing. That's current law. And that's not changing anything. Basically, it's just changing the word from makes to approve so that the treasurer or chair, in the chair in those limited circumstances, they don't have to be the actual person to do it. They can approve the expenditure and then allow a staff member to go out and basically purchase the item on behalf of the committee.
Again, so thank you for that. But again, the verb approve means something to me. That sounds like there's a piece of paper and she or he has to sign it, or there's an email and I need a paper trail that says, I grant you permission to do this. What will approve mean de facto if there were a court case or some allegation of the chair or the treasurer didn't approve this? What is that?
No,
what's the expectation?
Senator, I think it's in the other direction. It's limiting that they don't have to be the ones. It's codifying practice. They don't have to be. If you read the law very specifically, they might have to be the ones that take the check to Home Depot. And so as long as they approve the expenditure, which they basically have to sign off on the report, which shows the expenditures, that's all they have to do. It doesn't increase their work, it actually reduces their work. Is that correct, Jared?
That is correct, yes. I mean, technically, right, making the expenditure is like physically doing it yourself. This is now approving it, saying, here's a staff member, go and do it, and then payment would, be processed, and that would be a part of the approval.
At this. So I hear everything the chairman says, and that's helpful, and I hear everything you say, and that's helpful. I'm still struggling with the meaning of the word approve. So I understand if it's, hey, I'm going to go out and buy, $50 worth of X at the local hardware store. Is that okay? Are we going to be at that level of approval? And what does approval look like? I understand they don't have to buy the stuff. I understand they don't have to the check or the credit card or the anything in their hands. What does approval look like?
Right, Senator, you have to look at what it's replacing.
I see it.
I mean, making it, there's a closer nexus to all of the actions. I think you said it approves other people doing it. And the approval happens when they do the report. They don't have to give a permission slip to the person to take the check in. Senator Carozza.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, what problem are we trying to fix with this bill? Because if you're doing your reporting and if the current system is working and you're in compliance, I don't understand what this bill does to enhance the current system. I'm struggling with that, so.
Eric, can you answer that very
Sure.
succinctly?
I think that this makes it more technically accurate. Right now, your treasurers are not going out there and making every expenditure. So this is for some of the bigger campaigns. This is a more accurate, assessment of things, and which is current practice. If I forced every treasurer to go out and make every expenditure, that would be, I don't think treasurers. I think you would have a very difficult time getting all the treasurers. Making those late minute things. The treasurer this has nothing to. It doesn't change any of their duties. That they're still liable and still basically controlling the purse strings there, and they're still the signator on all the checks. and the bank account. That's still within their domain. They cannot, delegate that duty away. They only have to delegate the actual, like physically going to a store or, working with a vendor for these disbursements.
And the second part of the bill deals with the people who aren't paying on time?
Right, yes. And the second part about this is now just ensuring more compliance. And this is something that has worked very effectively in another state, Massachusetts, that, when you have bad actors that are, this is a very small group, that they have been, have a civil penalty imposed on them for compliance issues, that in order to help rectify them and put them on the straight and narrow, that they supply bank account records with it. So this is because the statements in which they have given previously have been deemed incorrect. And so we want to make sure that that part there is that the information that is being on our website is accurate, and that we're now trying to make sure that the bad actors have are getting their act together.
But this is after they've been cited, correct?
Yes, this is clearly they have gone through it. So this is only for campaign entities that have been found liable and a civil penalty imposed upon them for very specific compliance violations. So they have gone through all their due process. They have had an issue, and now it's almost as a part of the settlement agreement for the civil penalty is that for 2 years or less, they have to send in bank statements with them, which they should have, and it's not a major burden on any of the treasurers. And it can be submitted electronically through MP2S.
Okay. Senator Carrozza, follow up, and back to the Vice Chair.
One last question. What are the range of those civil penalties?
$500.
What's that?
Up to $500.
500?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, it seems to me like the latter half with the penalties is pretty important. The former half, the first half, just seems perplexing, and I wonder whether we might consider striking the first part, keeping the penalty portion, and I wonder, Jared, what you would think of that. Does that get us where we need to move the needle and yet not?
I mean, that's a policy question. I give that up to you. Yes, the second half is important because it's a compliance issue and it helps with enforcement. The first half is, I think, the more reality of the situation, but I give to the will of the committee.
Senator, if you want to make it.
I'm going to make a motion that the first chunk of the bill be deleted and that the bill ultimately start on page 4. Stacy, you can correct me, on line 16.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor of the motion to remove? The motion is to do the first part, remove, approve, and go back to make.
Kill the whole first part of the bill up to the penalties portion.
Okay, well, yes. I mean, okay, the first part of the bill replaces make with approve. So that is the Vice Chair's motion. On the motion, Senator Washington?
On the motion, again, I respect the Vice Chair, but I do think that there's a difference. There's a physicality to the word make, and approve is more of an administrative function. And as I read this, I probably all of us are maybe potentially out of compliance. And so I do think, or at least it's debatable. I'm going to vote against removing. I do think that there's a qualitative difference between make and approve. that I think is clarifying.
There's amendment to go back to make every place it occurs and remove approves. Signify your support by raising your hand. 4. Those opposed?
No, I think you didn't count right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it was 5.
Roll call.
I apologize. I was not paying attention, so I don't know what I'm voting on. Could you summarize what the motion is?
Whether to do both parts of this bill or to delete the first part and just do the penalties, which is, kind of critically needed. That's not playing it as frankly as probably others might.
Okay. So, yes.
The vote is
Yeah, we don't need 6 on an amendment. If the amendment passes,
well,
5 to 1.
yeah. Committee council, does it need 6 or not? I don't know.
It doesn't. A bill needs 6, but an amendment just needs a majority, needs more than the opposition.
I thought we discussed this last week. Did this come up last week?
Whatever.
Hold on.
This is one of those things that there are no hard and fast rules in committees, so it's whatever the committee decides it is, or the chair really, but in general, I think we have usually required 6 votes for amendments.
I thought last week an amendment died because it didn't have 6 votes. Is that right?
Yeah, we've had amendments in this committee die a whole session without 6 votes.
Okay. I'm going to go with consistency with all due respect, Vice Chair. If we took a simple majority in the past, I would have retained that policy, but I do remember we had a vote just last week on this very same issue. Okay, other amendments. The bills before you, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on Senate Bill or House Bill 1350? 1350. Senator Carozza. So it's. Did you want to speak, Senator Patterson?
Yes, I'm going to vote for the bill, but I just want to go on record as saying, I don't know, something about this bill that just leaves me a little bit nervous for some reason. And, because I don't know now, we're authorized to pay treasurers now. Will we be authorized to pay these other folks that might go out and do something like the chairperson of the committee?
No, I think Mr. DeMarina spoke to that. I think.
Maybe I missed that, okay.
As I heard it, he said this allows someone else to take the check, which they're probably doing now, and it doesn't have to be the treasurer themselves.
That's what I understood, it, yeah. So I'm saying if you got somebody consistently taking those checks, at some point, aren't they going to expect some pay? You don't think so? Okay.
Now, if you have a volunteer, if the treasurer doesn't want to do the actual purchase themselves, and there's another volunteer who will take the check to the person who supplies your signs,
Okay.
it's probably already being done. It'll continue to be done. They just want to make it reflect the reality. Is that, am I
Yes.
close?
That's correct, right. And
Chairman, I would assume that most of us don't run every expenditure past our campaign share for sign-off.
It's not the
And
treasurer,
this is-
the chair.
Now, I know, but if the treasurer's unavailable, it says in here now, we're going to call our campaign chair and say, is it okay if I buy snacks for my volunteers who are stuffing envelopes all day tomorrow? It's just, I just think it's weird.
Yeah,
I don't like the word approve.
Yeah, I don't think we do it now.
I'm quite aware
And I
of
don't
that.
think this changes anything
Right.
that we're doing.
Approve means
Okay.
something different than me. Anyway,
Okay.
it's okay. I tried and failed.
Okay, on the vote, let's do a roll call. .911, 911, excuse me. 911? No. That sounds bells ringing. Okay. We're going to go to 1322.
thank you.
Thank you, Jared.
House Bill 1322, Primary and Secondary Education, School Personnel, Prohibition on Retaliation for Not Returning to In-Person Instruction and Work. This emergency bill prohibits, during the 2020-21 school year, specified individuals from disciplining, suspending, terminating, or retaliating against specified professional school personnel for choosing not to return to the school building for in-person instruction if the individual meets specified conditions. Consistent with applicable laws and labor agreements, during a state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the State Board of Education and local boards of education must allow teachers, educational support professionals, and other professional school personnel who have not received the full course of the FDA-approved vaccine to instruct or work remotely to the extent practicable. There is one amendment. It's on page 27 of your packet, and a reprint begins on page 30. So these amendments require the state board and county boards, to the extent practicable, to allow teachers and other specified personnel who have not received a COVID-19 vaccination to instruct or work remotely and to make accommodations to facilitate that choice. During the 2020-21 school year, if a teacher or other specified personnel who meet specified conditions applies for an accommodation, the county board must send the response within 5 days of receipt of the application. And it prohibits the governor, state superintendent, the state board, a county superintendent, or a county board from taking certain disciplinary or retaliatory actions against a teacher or other specified personnel for choosing not to return to the school building for in-person instruction during the 2020-2021 school year.
Senator Riley?
I've got a question on the whole bill. So can I ask it now? Mr. Chairman, it seems like we're reaching into collective bargaining and protocols and procedures set out by the State Board of Education. Is this an appropriate bill for us to take up?
the committee can decide not to take it up or to take it up. I don't think it's illegal, if that's the question. Well, I'd rather the attorney answer that question.
No.
So I have a question about the substance of the bill, but I wonder whether we should have it on the floor, in which case I'm happy to move favorable, but I do have a substantive question and possibly an amendment.
Sure.
Okay, so move favorable on the bill.
Let's get a second. If people don't want it, they'll vote against it, and it'll be unfavorable. Is there a second? I'll do a second to get it up there. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman, on page 3, line 8, or lines 5 through 9, it says, if the professional school personnel have not received a federally authorized vaccine, blah, 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 except we all know that it's not just getting the vaccine, but it takes a few weeks afterwards for it to be maximally effective. So it's not like the day after we get our vaccine, we can go and romp and play and breathe in each other's airspace. We were instructed 2 weeks after getting the second dose. And this reads that it would be the day after your second dose or the day after one dose of Johnson & Johnson or something. And I wonder, we can refer to you or to Senator Lamb or whatever, but it seems to me like that section might need to be expanded to maximally protect our educators.
No, fair question, and if someone can speak to it. What line was it, Senator?
It's on page 3, top of the page, lines 5 through 9, page 32 of the interlineated. Okay. And it just says, after you get the vaccine, you have to go back to work, basically.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fair question and a good one. The evidence shows that people do not build up full immunity post-vaccination until 2 weeks afterwards. So, for example, at Hopkins, we don't consider you fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after you've received the second dose of either Moderna or Pfizer, or if it's the J&J vaccine, it's obviously one dose. So it's 2 weeks.
So I would like to propose an amendment, and Ms. Goodman can come up with the right language, but I think we could say 15 days or 2 weeks or whatever that looks like.
I didn't get that question.
Talk about the bill as a whole before we amend.
Well, if it's going to go down, we shouldn't spend time on amendments.
Fair.
I mean, okay, well, okay, let's take a few comments. We'll come back to this amendment. I think it's totally appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking, by the time this bill will go into effect, it'll go into effect right away, I guess. We're almost into the school year in a couple months. So really, to me, this would be more of a bill that you're thinking about when schools are back in swing in September. And the way the vaccine rollouts are going, pretty much anybody that is going to want the vaccine, whether it be 1 shot, 2 shots, and plus you have your 2 week period, we should be good by September. So I really don't see the point of this bill. I don't really think it does much, and I just don't honestly see the necessity of passing it at this time.
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chairman. This concern. Is there a rationale for excluding the, say, the janitors and the food service workers from this bill? It talks about just the professionals in the school system.
No, Senator, I think on line 21 and 22, on page 2, it says teacher, educational support professional, any other professional school personnel if the individual, I don't know what educational support.
I think the concern is that the janitorial staff and food service personnel, unless they're administrative in nature, they can't perform their duties remotely. And this would be for individuals who are allowed to be assigned to work remotely.
Yeah, okay, I understand that, but why do we want to exclude the janitors and the food service workers anyway. I mean, I understand the definition, Ms. Goodman, but why should we just exclude those individuals who are vulnerable in those professions? So is there legal rationale to do that, or could we include them if we choose to?
There's not a legal rationale. It seems the substance of the bill is for an accommodation to instruct or work remotely because they meet certain conditions. I think in this case, teachers, support personnel who would be most in contact with students and are able to instruct or work remotely are covered, whereas individuals who cannot perform their job functions just aren't covered under these provisions.
Senator Ellis, if you think about a bus driver can't telework. They've got to show up to drive the bus or the kids can't get to school. And so a bus driver, as much as we want to protect them, and I hope they get vaccinated and I hope they wear masks and all that, but they can't telework, work remotely, or instruct remotely, so they wouldn't be covered under this bill, as an example. There's no kind of plan B for them.
Yeah, and I understand that. So I know we're not doing amendments now, but why should we not protect janitors and food service workers from losing their jobs? They're very vulnerable. And so the thing is, I talked on the floor with a different issue with one of my good friends in Charles County Down. He was a bus driver for the school system, and he died from COVID. And so the thing is, this is kind of like, I don't want to leave those folks out. They need protection also. I know the constraints of this bill, but if they feel that they cannot work safely, even though they can't remotely work, why should they lose their jobs? So that's my thought process. So thank you.
Senator, it's my understanding educational support does it say educational support personnel?
Professional.
Okay, let's go with Senator Simon Ayer.
If I read the bill correctly, they don't have to be performing instruction like a janitor. Say a janitor's 65, they didn't get the vaccine, and they chose not to return. That's the same qualification as a teacher. In A1, it says, okay, you met 65, so that checks off the box for 1, because those are all ORs. Then it says, in 2, says they didn't receive the vaccine, so you check that off. And then finally, chooses not to return to the school building. So is there something in there that says they have to be teaching?
Section B, if you look at page 3, line 14, if a teacher, an educational support professional, or any other professional school personnel submits to the county board an application for an accommodation to instruct or work remotely because the individual meets the conditions. Unfortunately, food service personnel and janitorial staff cannot work remotely and perform their job functions.
I must have it. I'm just looking on the normal system. It's doing a reprint. It says, and show me where I'm wrong here. In A, line 13 on mine, it says the governor or whoever may not discipline, suspend, terminate, or otherwise retaliate against a teacher, support special, if the individual, 1, for example, is 65 years old, they have not received the vaccine, and they choose not to come back to the school.
Are you looking at the bill online, or are you looking at the reprint?
I'm looking at the reprint on the main system we use on the floor.
I don't know how you could do that, since I made the amendments and put
Oh,
together the reprint.
there's amendments to these? So this you put some amendments in here?
Yeah, I mean, I described them, and then we were... So that was struck.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I was very confused for a moment there.
Gotcha. All right, I have to look at that now.
Conditions are on page 3, after line 14. At least 65 years old.
So the bill was reorganized because it was a little challenging to follow before. So to make it a little more logical, it was reorganized to incorporate the ideas.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Brian. Senator Riley, followed by Senator Carrozza. By then, we'll come back to Senator Simoneer and then Senator Ellis.
Ms. Goodman, on page 3 of your amended version on line 5, you talk about the 2021 school year. When does the 21 school year end? June 30. And if this is an emergency bill
That's the fiscal year.
and if this is an emergency bill that goes into effect 30 days after it passes the House and the Senate, is that accurate?
Be signed first, doesn't it?
Yes.
And then it's 30 days after the signature, or as
No,
soon?
it's immediately upon enactment on the signature.
Okay, so let's suppose that our governor's really sharp and he signs it April 15th. We got April 15th, May 15th, June 15th. It's 75 days of coverage that we have to be concerned about.
That's accurate, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to understand, what problem are we trying to resolve? I mean, in my district, our health departments have worked with our school systems to make sure our teachers and school personnel, all school personnel, would get the vaccine as soon as possible. And this hasn't been an issue. So I'm trying to understand, are we making an assumption that, have there been cases across the state? It's because it's not happening in my district where the systems aren't working with the teachers on their individual health situations?
I can't speak firsthand. I've heard anecdotally in a couple of counties, Baltimore County being one, where people were told they're going to report no matter what, or their job is in trouble. And I think the governor, one of his press conferences, made one statement about, I don't know if he said fire teachers or something. I don't remember the phrase, so I don't want to be quoted. So I can't speak firsthand. I'm going to, either Simoneer or Ellis, or we'll go to Gallion, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at on 28 of the amendment package, you go down, it talks about, I'm trying to find a line here now, where they, had the course of the shots. Is it addressed anywhere? Maybe I'm just missing it. What happens if a teacher refuses to get the shots? Does that mean, in theory, they could never, under this bill, during this timeline, be asked to go back, even if they were offered the shots and refused it?
Well, Senator, first, I think we're working off of the reprint on 30 and 32. I think the same issue, the same language. If we look at about 60% the way down the page, is that right?
I think B, 2. Thank you, Senator. All right, that language says, has not received a federally authorized vaccine for COVID-19 due to having an underlying medical condition that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention or the individual's physician has identified as putting the individual at increased risk from complications from the vaccine. So this section is about accommodations. it says, if an individual who meets this one of these criteria and submits an application for an accommodation to instruct or work remotely, then they have to receive an answer within 5 days of submitting the application or receipt by the county board. So this language assumes that the individual doesn't get the vaccine because they have a reason for not getting it, other than just choice. That's what that language says.
Okay.
So if I understand that, because I'm looking at the right language now, in B, it says basically they have to submit an application to the board saying they would like to accommodate them to have instruction remotely. So if I'm a teacher and I give an application to the board and I meet one of these criterias in one, right, I know, but if I meet one of those, 4 in the first, and then I say I don't want the vaccine and I don't want to show up to work, they can't be penalized.
My reading of it is if they choose not to get the vaccine, they don't meet the number 2 requirement.
And where do you see that?
So because that language presupposes that you cannot get the vaccine for a specific purpose, and that purpose is you have been identified as putting you at increased risk from complications because of your underlying medical condition. So if you're reading this correctly, the conditions consist of 1, you have to be at least 65, you have to have, or documentation of an underlying medical condition, or live in a household with or be a caretaker of an individual that has a condition, or be a teacher or a specified personnel who's been temporarily assigned to instruct or work remotely, and you have not received the vaccine because of that underlying condition, and you have to choose not to return to the school building. So that's how that section functions. So you have to meet 3 criteria, but number 1 is one of those choices, or conditions, I should say.
So they're mandated.
In other words, just so we're clear, you have to do 1, 2, and 3, but under 1, you can do any of the 3.
Okay.
There are ors and then an and.
So let me just, under normal vaccines, there are exemptions why people don't have to take them. Could be religious reasons or whatever. But in this case, we're going to say they don't have that exemption? They have to get the vaccine?
Well, to apply for an accommodation under this section, they would have to qualify under that language. And the only reason they would be able to qualify is they didn't take it because they're at increased risk for a complication.
Right, but what I'm saying is,
And I'm saying, I
current
understand what
law
you're saying.
says that people are allowed to have an exemption from getting a vaccine, but in this provision of law where we're setting up where they don't have to come back in, they're not giving them any exemption.
Correct. So the principles of statutory construction say the specific overrides the general. In this case, this is a law later in time that understands an existing law that allows for certain exemptions for vaccines, and it does not include that in this condition. So no, those would not be considered under this section.
Okay, I didn't know all about that
Rightly
construction.
or wrongly,
Right.
if someone didn't want to come back for whatever reason, they could say, I'm not getting the shot because of philosophical difference, religious differences, and that would allow them to apply. And if they met all the other criteria, they could ask to work at home, and I guess if they didn't come back, they couldn't be disciplined. That's my understanding. I'm not speaking for or against the
Yeah.
point you're making.
All right, and the other thing, I think we're starting to get into this political arena as far as putting all these whereases in there. It's the whereases are critical of the governor and other things. I just don't think that helps to the merit of the bills, and sometimes we vote against good, solid bills because they put a political statement as a whereas. I think, anybody can do what they'd like, but I'd rather see resolutions put in opposed to trying to just stick this on here. I don't know, it looks like you guys, or the amendments did not amend out the whereas, where the State Department of Education has consistently failed to work collaboratively.
Senator, I'm going to jump in. My view, and I haven't always read the room right. I think if there were 6 votes or the 6th vote to support the bill went along with getting rid of the whereases, I think the substance is more important than the whereases. Now, I don't know where the votes are. I haven't talked to anybody. If that's the difference in it passing or not, I think that would be debatable. And we haven't done a straw vote, so I don't know where people are. I'm going to go back to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify, and maybe Ms. Goodman can help. So I'm on page 32 in the 2B1, sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, that whole section. And you said that the and, or. I see after Roman 3, I see an or, and after 2, I see an and. But I'm not seeing after 1 sub 1 or
Right.
1 sub 2.
So because this is a list, so if you look, 1, as in drafting, they say this is subsection B, and this is item 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Under item 1 is item I, double I, triple I, and IV.
Okay.
So as you see, so it's a list within a list. Think of it that way. So under item 1, the items I, double I, triple I, and IV, that's an or. You can have, it's a disjunctive.
Any one of those 4.
Any one of those plus 2 and 3.
Okay, that's helpful. And I just have another question while I've got the mic here. So I'm living with someone who has a health problem, or I'm over 65. Let's not do the over 65. Living with someone with a health problem, or I have an underlying health problem. Are there privacy protections? I don't really want to tell you about Aunt Bertha's diseases and whatever. Do I have to submit that in a form to my principal, to the superintendent, to the Board of Ed? Am I filling out forms? Like, how is that actually going to work? And I understand what Senator Riley said, but it's still legislation, and even if it's only in effect for 6 or 8 weeks or something, or summer school or whatever, I still think we ought to get it right.
I think that my interpretation of the language would be a letter from a physician that said that the person that you're living with or taking care of meets this conditions would be sufficient. And you didn't necessarily have to disclose what the actual condition was, just that you met these as long as it was from a physician. That's the way I would read that language. So
And then-
documentation, yes.
And then again, a follow-up. Who sees it? Is it kept on file?
It says it has to be submitted to the county board.
So I don't know if we have a HIPAA expert here, but again, this just seems a little bit like in
You're not
somebody's health
disclosing their
business.
medical condition, you're just saying that they meet the conditions of this. It's a letter from a physician. I mean, because you're required to document it, you're not giving out the specifics. I mean, you don't even necessarily have to say, I would imagine, again, you're not giving the specifics of their health condition. The physician is saying, this person that you live with meets this condition.
Okay.
I think the purpose of that provision is to prevent just an assertion without some sort of proof that the condition has been met. And this would require some sort of proof.
Okay, all right.
Without the specifics, it's not personal health information.
Before we get into amendments, I'm sorry, Senator Lamb, you haven't spoken on this.
No, I was just answering her question. Without
Okay.
the specifics of the conditions, it's not
Okay.
personal health information, so.
Look, let's do this. I'm going to ask for a straw vote. No one is locked into it. If the votes are there to move forward, well, before we even do that, if the votes are there to move forward, we can take any tightening amendments. If the votes aren't there, I don't want to spend any time. And I don't know if this matters or not, but if there's no objection, I'm going to move we strike the whereases. And again, it might not change anybody's mind, but if there's no objection, we're striking the whereases up to line 15 in page 2. Okay. If we were to take a formal vote on this, are you likely to vote in favor or against are the 2 questions I'm going to ask, okay? Those who are likely to vote in favor of it, please raise your hand.
That assumes the 2 weeks are going to be added and that the whereases are going to be deleted, but no other changes at this moment.
No, hold it.
Clarifying.
Even before we discuss it, the whereases are gone.
Got it. Okay.
If there are 6 votes that want to proceed, we'll look at amendments, yours that you talked about 20 minutes ago and any others. Okay, those who are likely to want to support this with a possibility of additional amendments, who will likely vote for it depending on the amendments, signify by raising your hand. Okay, I count 6 votes. Okay, let's look at amendments that are tightening amendments. You, Senator?
In whatever language our legal counsel decides, basically vaccinated plus 2 weeks or whatever is recommended by the CDC for that particular drug, because there are other drugs that are going to be coming out imminently, created in my district. Is there a second for that motion?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Was it your 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Okay.
Or whatever period of time is recommended by the CDC or Health Department, because there are going to be additional drugs coming out that
Is
might
there
have
any
different rating periods.
objection to either use fully vaccinated, which would include, with the definition of including the wait time after the shot, or 2 weeks? I mean, that's the intent, and Ms. Goodman can add that. Any objection to that amendment? Okay, that's adopted. Other amendments, Senator Ellis.
I know this might be a little complicated, but I would love to add all school-based employees who come in contact with children, to include janitors, school service, food service workers. I know it has to change probably languages in several spots, but it's very important to include those folks also. And school bus drivers. Thought you were dancing there, huh?
Senator, I guess my question is back to something somebody asked earlier. About working remotely. I mean, I think the bill is not forcing them back in the building because they can work remotely. And I think one of the conditions is they had been temporarily working remotely, as almost all professional teachers had been doing. So I'm just trying to understand how that fits. I mean, look, hopefully everyone has gotten vaccinated. Support staff, custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, everybody. But I'm trying to reconcile the issue, which I think is underlying this, of teachers who've been teaching at home and have all these conditions, that they can request arrangements to continue to work from home and not be disciplined. So help me here.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Chairman. And that's the issue with this pandemic. You know, the more educated professional folks have done so much better health-wise because they can work remotely. So we're looking at the janitors, the blue-collar workers who can work remotely, who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. You know, our African Americans, our Latino citizens, and low-income workers. Seem like, as a society, we're not making any accommodations for them. We're just focusing on the professional class of folks. And I think we just can't ignore them. And it's you know, and I just think they should definitely, even though they cannot work remotely, food service workers or bus drivers, but why should they lose their jobs if they meet all these conditions, whether 65 or underlying conditions? And we had on top of that the slow rollout of the vaccine in minority communities. where these folks are just behind anyway. And so it's a bigger problem, and I know we'll have to tweak some of the language in this bill, but I think, we need to kind of just include them so they will not lose their jobs.
Figure out how we change the bill. Because paragraph C near the bottom seems to be the operative language. A consequence of the individual's choosing to not return to the school building for in-person instruction.
So we can stop at return to the school building, strike for in-person instruction. Because that's specific to the professionals. If we include the janitors and school bus drivers and food service workers, we'll just strike that.
Senator, so it's my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, that I don't know. I don't know if they get paid if they don't go to work. So if they don't go to work, I'm not sure they get paid. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just trying to.
Under the first CARES Act, a lot of people got paid for not going to work. The federal government, and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Plan. Folks were not working; they were still getting the paycheck. So that's nothing new during the pandemic. Various levels of government made adjustments for that previously. So what this bill is doing is protecting people from losing their jobs and losing their pensions and all of the associated benefits we'll have in a job.
Like I have to be the bearer of, of doom and gloom. So my heart is totally with you, Senator Ellis. I think it sucks that there are people on the front line, and they tend to be black and brown, and they tend to be lower income and maybe less educated, and those are their jobs, and that's how they support their family. I totally get all of that. Not every bill can address every problem. This bill is crafted to protect those with underlying conditions, vulnerabilities, who still can do their jobs, who still can educate young people, but have been doing it remotely and for health reasons or for health in their home reasons need to do it remotely. The problem is that if our bus drivers and our food service personnel and our janitors don't show up for work, A, they can't do it remotely, and B, we've got kids who can't get to school, kids who can't get nutritious school lunches, and C, the school buildings get really dirty. And so I don't know if there's another workaround to help protect jobs while still getting kids to school, getting them fed, and having the buildings cleaned. And so while my heart is with you, I don't know what the answer, but I don't think it's in this bill. And certainly not in this bill as crafted, with its intent as crafted. Am I wrong?
No, that was what I was trying to.
Okay, I just said it more directly.
Yeah, and it's difficult, right?
It's totally difficult, and it breaks my heart. I don't know what the answer is, but
as a son of a janitor and my dad was a janitor, my mom was a nurse's aide for years. Being a janitor, just working hard, I feel that this society don't look out for us. It's to get too difficult to look out for us. It's too complicated. It's so hard. And then we have all these disparities, and I think it could take a little look to include those folks in this bill, rewrite some of this language to protect them from not losing their jobs, not losing their pensions. Why should it be your life or your job, your life or your pension? You know, I mean, I think we put too much difficulties on our lower income folks. And we throw our hands up and say, it's so hard, let's not address this. But my friend Mark, who died, you know, he left a wife and 2 grandbabies that they were the providers for, you know. And so life is difficult. And I think we can rewrite this bill. It's a little more difficult, but it's a great bill. I mean, I love the bill. It protects folks and their jobs during this pandemic. But I just think really deeply in my heart that we need to spend the energy, maybe not exactly tonight, but to really work this and get that language right to protect all school-based folks, including bus drivers. And I'll leave it at that. Leave the rest to the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could we hold the bill and talk about it and think about it, maybe talk with the, because, you know, I don't really see how we're going to resolve it tonight.
Hold. We won't go much longer. Have 974, I know there was questions about that yesterday. Are we anywhere closer? Do we spend time on it? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. I'll do it next. I forgot. Senator Patterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we were able to work with Senator Simonier and the sponsor of the bill, and I think we reached a compromise where the penalty would be tremendously reduced. I think from 4,000 to 2,000. Is that? What? Oh, you have the amendment, Senator Washington?
Sorry, I don't have the amendment. I think we talked with committee. Was
I
my
thought we left
understanding
it
that
up to you for the
Simonier would
amendment.
handle it. Well, anyway, I'll tell you what it was. So it was to reduce it from to 18 months rather than 4 years. So that's the amendment. So I would move that amendment.
Okay, it was 18 months. I thought it was 4. Okay.
The actual. Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah. So it's the last provision where it sets out a misdemeanor for 4 years, and I believe it says 2,000 or 2,000, that they have that option.
That's 2,000, okay.
Yeah, or for, so it would be to just amend it from 4 years to 18 months.
Okay. Senator Patterson, you're Vice Chair of the delegation. That's good with you?
Yes, we can live with that.
Any objection to accepting the amendment? Before we take it to the floor, we'll need
Get the amendment.
walk around to the 8 senators or get 5 of them.
Okay.
Okay. Any objection? Anybody want to be recorded in the negative for the bill? 974. Seeing none. Let's go to HB 130.
All right, House Bill 130, Commission on LGBTQ Affairs established. This bill establishes a Commission on LGBTQ Affairs, which is to be housed within the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. The bill outlines the membership of the Commission and, I'm sorry? Okay, thank you. And the responsibilities of the Commission. The responsibilities of this Commission include assessing the challenges that face the LGBTQ community, studying best practices for LGBTQ inclusion, working with local governments to pass inclusive laws for the LGBTQ community, amongst other items. The bill authorizes the Commission to seek federal and private sources of money to sustain its operations. There were no amendments, and this is not a cross-filed bill, and there was no opposition presented at the hearing.
So I'm looking at the commission, and don't we have a civil rights commission already that deals with discrimination across the state?
I know there are several cultural initiatives that are housed within the governor's office.
The Maryland Civil Rights Commission. That when you have discrimination on civil right, on all kind of things, you go there and they investigate and track and all that.
Sure. So I've heard of that, and I'm slightly familiar with that commission.
And our office has used them, very good. So I'm kind of wondering what discrimination are we looking for in this bill that's not covered under the civil rights, where they investigate and do all that? I mean, they do housing, employment, all kind of things.
Scope of the Civil Rights Commission to see. There are certain public accommodations, the scope of which does not apply to the LGBTQ community under federal laws. So if the commission is specific to federal laws, there may be some sort of overlap, but I would have to check to see the scope of the commission to see if that is enforcing federal or just state, which may cover a wider breadth.
Okay. Then the other part of this, it really seems to be focusing on inclusion opposed to discrimination. And the thing that really concerns me about this, I mean, that gets funded by advocacy groups, and they can all put their money in here. And then, let's see what page this is. On page 5, line 8 and 9, one of their missions is to work with local governments to pass laws that are inclusive of the LGBTQ individuals. So we're actually creating a lobbyist group with taxpayer money to lobby and pass laws at the local level. Did I understand that correct?
So the language does say that the focus of the commission with the individuals that are included would be to work to cooperatively pass laws. Looking at it as a lobbying group, I'm not.
I mean, this is not talking about state laws. This is talking about outreaching to local governments
Right.
to help pass laws in their local jurisdictions.
That's correct.
Do you know of any other commissions that do that we have in state law that are lobbying, taking money from advocates to fund this with other taxpayer money to have them lobby local governments to pass laws? Because when I looked at the commission under this section of law, there was nothing like this that I could find.
Okay.
Would want to take another look at some of the cultural commissions that we already have within this Governor's Office of Community Affairs to see if their local outreach is similar.
Okay.
But that wasn't within the span of
Could you get back to us on that? Can
Sure.
we get that? Seems to be a completely
Okay,
new topic.
we will have council look at this and take it up later. Look, there are other commissions. There's a Women's Commission. As I recall, some of these groups are protected classes who have historic discrimination. So I think the idea here, and I haven't spoken with the sponsor, is to have a commission like we do on women that will deal with the interests and effects and biases on these groups to give, formalize at a fairly higher level their needs and concerns. That's my understanding. I'll have Senator Washington, then we're going to put a hold on it.
Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, I agree on the hold, and if that, I could see where that could be an issue, and so I think making sure that it's consistent with other commissions would be appropriate. So I know you don't need me to endorse the whole, but I do endorse the whole and would be interested in exploring that language and making sure that it's consistent with other commissions.
couple more and we'll get out of here. We'll vote tomorrow. Yes.
Really quick. So on Bill 1322, I got a text from MSCA saying educational professionals include these folks I was talking about. And I looked it up on their website. It says NEA include educational support professionals, including clerical, food service, transportation, custodial services. So with that, we can, if you want to move the bill, because that covers that, because we put it on a hold because of this question. So in the bill, it talks about, it protects ESPs, educational support professionals. And that's basically the janitors and the bus drivers, all that.
Yeah, but Senator, it's still the focus, just because I heard what you said, it still is about people who can work remotely. So they will not be affected by this particular piece of legislation, not removing, they have other, collective bargaining rights and employment rights, but we can do whatever. I mean, you were the one who had concerns, and the Senator Washington said to put a hold on it.
My concerns are resolved, so that's fine. Just want to mention that to you.
Okay. We'll take it up tomorrow. 1343, that's an easy one.
You want me to read? All right. It alters the manner in which members of the Anne Arundel County Republican Party, Republican Central Committee are elected. Okay.
Any objection to the Republican Seeing none, the bill passes unanimously to the floor. Let's go to, that was Kipke Bill 1343. Let's go to the Wilson Bill 373.
Just as a reminder, I'll read a sentence here. This is House Bills 373, Education, Child Abuse, and Sexual Misconduct Prevention, Hiring Emergent Employees. The bill authorizes a local board of education or non-public school to hire an applicant as an emergent employee for up to 60 days, pending a specified review of information and records regarding an individual's employment history as required under current law for applicants who will have direct contact with minors. The issue raised at the last voting session was on page 5 of the bill, in which one of the provisions said within 60 days after hiring an applicant as an emergent employee, a county board can dismiss the emergent employee for any reason other than child sexual abuse or sexual misconduct. They may appeal that, but they do not allow the appeal for a dismissal of child sexual abuse or sexual misconduct. And so after speaking with several people on this particular issue, what they highlighted is, number one, if there is an actual charge in the criminal or civil courts, then that is the system by which they appeal the process. Two, if there was an accusation with a previous employer, at the time that that accusation was made, they had the opportunity to take issue with the charge or the allegation with the previous employer. Whether they decided to use that process or not, that's up to the individual. And so now, this many years or even far away from that previous job, that process to appeal is closed, so the decisions they made will follow them going forward. However, this was considered, and they thought this was essentially an agreement that, because they're really not looking for, this process is to find individuals who may have had these particular issues in the past, and might be going from job to job and missing, and it's missed in their employment records and history. So if emergent employees are dismissed for any reasons other than child sexual abuse or those types of allegations, they can appeal through the processes established in the bill, but otherwise not.
Questions the other day, let's see if we've clarified them. Senator?
Thank you. I was the one who raised a lot of the questions, and it's not that I am here defending sex abusers or anything. It was a question of if there were an allegation, a rumor, or anything, if someone could be fired and not have any ability to appeal. I checked in with the Attorney General. I checked in with some other folks, and what Ms. Goodman indicated, I think I am comfortable with the bill as drafted. Thank you. So you have a question?
What is the definition of emergent employees? Is it in the bill?
So an emergent employee in this case just means essentially probationary. They're hired, and as they conduct the background investigation of this individual, they can work for 60 days. And if it's not resolved in that 60 days, then they have to stop working. They're essentially fired, constructively fired. But it's a time period to make sure they can complete all of the background check information that they need to check under the provisions of existing law.
And so during that time that they're probationary, that period is when all the safeguards are in place?
Correct.
I'm sorry. I see no other question. Oh, sorry, Senator Simonaire, please.
This is just a new area for me. So that's current law with all the protection in place.
Correct.
Why are they in probation? I mean, what is this? Just
So when this law was put in place, and it was like a year or two ago when this passed, what they found is that there's a lot of protections now, and they have to do a lot of digging into the individual's past to make sure they get all the appropriate paperwork, and it took longer than they thought. So, and they were also missing people who they would like because it was taking a long time and they couldn't get them to stay. So this is something that was started in Pennsylvania, and it seemed to work very well for them. It allows some data sharing between various entities so that instead of everyone having to do this over and over again, they can share it between the entities. It gives the individual an opportunity to start working while their background stuff is cleared, but yet still they're protected, and there's guardrails for the child safety.
thank you.
And more to the point, and the Senator also calling you next. This was Delegate Wilson's bill originally. He worked on this for a couple of years, I believe. And I think he got feedback from local school systems that they agree with it. But I don't want to call it an overreach, but it became so cumbersome that they can't hire some people because of the processes. So I think even while it was his bill, he's now in a second review of it, thinks we got to pull it back a tiny bit. That's my understanding. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm concerned the 60 days for the emergent employees. That's a lot of time for someone to roam around the schools. I know the bill talks about they have to be supervised and the cameras there. So, I mean, chances are there will not be someone watching that camera, or if that employee's on the job for 8 hours, someone will review 8 hours worth of footage, and I'm really concerned about that. In recent history, we have a spate of in several counties, individuals who abuse lots of children. And I just feel like 60 days is a long time because of bureaucratic inefficiencies to allow potential perpetrators to be roaming around our school system. You know, if a bureaucracy is efficient, they can project employment needs and start the process earlier. And and complete the process sooner. I'm just really concerned about that 60 days for someone not to have their full background check done. That's a lot of time for a lot of potential damage, I believe.
School liable, you know, if you've had some indication that someone was abusing a kid and you did not take the corrective action to remove that person and later on it turned out to be true, wouldn't you be liable for major charges? I'm just talking in general, but maybe counsel.
So before a county board or a non-public school can hire this person as an emergent employee, they have to provide all the information and supporting documentation. The employer can't know that there's any reason that would possibly disqualify the person. The applicant has to swear or affirm that they're not disqualified, and the individual can't work alone. The issue that came up before is that there's so much required now. They have to go to every previous job and get them to provide them with all this information that it either dissuading people from applying or it just takes a long time because the county board or the non-public school can't force the previous employer to send the information within a reasonable amount of time. So it's not necessarily bureaucratic inefficiency, it's just who is giving what information and what their timelines are for the employee.
So that
I think
employee
that's
couldn't
part of
be
the issue.
reassigned to another position or put them on administrative leave until the investigation is completed?
Right, but I mean, if you're on investigative leave from a job you don't even have for 60, 90, 120 days, are you going to try and even take that job anymore?
Okay.
Gentlemen, I think we're reached diminishing returns. I think on this bill, seriously, people should reach out to Delegate Wilson. Well, okay. Okay, we can proceed. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded, favorable. I misread things. Discussion, Senator Ellis.
Okay. Since the committee wants to move it, could we amend instead of saying 60 days, maybe give the school system 30 days to get their paperwork?
I just don't know.
I think that's a feasibility question, Senator Ellis. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to compile the paperwork, put it out to all their former employers, and get the response back and process it in time to meet a 30-day. Ms. Goodman, is that right? Okay. I think 60 days is probably more reasonable and faster than 90 days for sure. And here, guys, going back to the issue we had before, you know, if there were personnel that were out because of, God forbid, some future pandemic or a health problem or surgery or childbirth or whatever, sometimes in a school you need to bring in people fast. And whether it's admin or paraprofessionals or whatever, sometimes you do a quick background check, but for the more in-depth one, they still need bodies, and that's, you know, and that are qualified, and you want to be thorough. And so, as Senator Patterson said, they're going to be supervised and not directly with kids, but in the meantime, they're starting as the school year starts or as the new birth parent is out or whatever, and they can start doing their job and educating our kids.
Yeah. But they are with kids. The bill calls, they are working with students.
With supervision and with, as you said, as Senator Patterson said.
Yeah, Senator, I would also say, not that we have to put the total trust in them, but the Superintendent's Association supports it as well as Howard County Schools and
Montgomery.
And Charles County Public Schools. And I'd be surprised if they want to put themselves out there where they brought in someone who abused kids. I would hope the safeguards are there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Senator.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't say they bring in someone who will abuse kids. I mean, the superintendent, no one would do that.
No.
But what I'm saying is that has happened before.
Yes.
And so, you know, creates such devastation in communities, you know. So, thank you.
that amendment, you can, Senator. The floor is always open.
Put an amendment in. They should do their paperwork within 30 days of a hire.
Is there a second? Senator, I don't see a second. Okay, the bill as it's in front of us, HB 373, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative? Senator Ellis, so that's 9, 1, and 1 absent. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'm not sure how many other committees are still meeting, probably none. None. We'll take up some tomorrow. We still have the clean cross files, which we can do by consent. I know there are a lot of delegates saying, where's my bill, where's my bill? You know, we've got the Senate bill. We can do those in about 5 seconds. So we will get to them tomorrow. The next day we have 2 holds. People should do some homework on those and get clear on what they want or don't want. And we'll pick up with the other bills we haven't gotten to yet. Thank you. Get some rest.